province, and as we've heard many times, 18.6, an alarming 18.6 in Cape Breton. So, Mr. Speaker, the minister talks about sound investments. With that much, $600 million of sound investments does not result in 0.2% GDP growth. Meanwhile, the minister is more interested in picking winners and losers and issuing press releases and getting quick and easy photo ops. So my question, when will the minister start putting the needs of Nova Scotian businesses first and get back to creating an economic environment where all Nova Scotian businesses can succeed?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I'd like the member opposite to understand is that our investments are very, very accommodating. We don't have blanket investments. We've made huge investments in small business in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, by streamlining process, by eliminating red tape. Mr. Speaker, under our watch, we've had 400 companies that have benefited from the investments that we made. Mr. Speaker, we've had 10,000 Nova Scotian employees that have benefited by the PIP, by our investment in them, Mr. Speaker. We've had, I've had invites for a stream in Glace Bay, Mr. Speaker, when I visited them, giving me a tour, and very, very grateful and thankful for the efforts of this government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what we hear from Chamber of Commerce's, not just here in Halifax, but also in Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker, where they say, stay focused, you're on the right track, and stay there.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Labour and Advanced Education. Mr. Speaker, this week the Premier committed to an Atlantic Workforce Partnership that will standardise apprenticeship programs between the Atlantic provinces. Mr. Speaker, on December 8, 2011, his department launched a review of the apprenticeship program. Then, on January 15, 2013, the department launched a new review of the apprenticeship program. Mr. Speaker, this government is dragging its feet on making changes to the apprenticeship program and on getting our own workforce trained for projects, like the federal shipbuilding contract with Irving. So my question through you to the Minister, when will the Minister finally release the findings of the Apprenticeship Review Report and get on with taking action?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, we are working with the private sector, the unionized workers, the merit employers, Mr. Speaker. We're working with everybody, Mr. Speaker. What we're not doing, Mr. Speaker, is stopping growth in that area where people can actually get work. We're not cutting down jobs in Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker, and getting rid of the Veterans Affairs, Mr. Speaker, getting rid of people that work for Service Canada, Mr. Speaker, where we go to for some of our training. Mr. Speaker, instead of that, the federal government is poking around trying to get rid of the LMAs, Mr. Speaker. He should be here supporting us and fighting with Nova Scotians, fighting with the Tory Premier from Newfoundland, the Tory Premier from New Brunswick, the Liberal Mr. Speaker, you know what, I'll sit down because I just feel sorry for that lot.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes on his first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And this caucus feels sorry for the people that are out west that want to come back home to work. Mr. Speaker, the Minister and the former Minister refused to look at increasing the apprenticeship to journey person ratio. This is something Newfoundland has done successfully. Newfoundland and Labrador also has an agreement in place with Alberta that allows apprentices from Newfoundland to accumulate work experience in Alberta, something the NDP cancelled here. Since we are now taking a regional approach to apprenticeship, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister adopt the programs Newfoundland has put in place for its apprenticeship programs?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that every question over there follows the flawed logic of their leader, Mr. Speaker. That's just not true. We have working agreements with the province of Alberta. But, Mr. Speaker, what we're trying to do, as opposed to what they would want to do, Mr. Speaker, They may not want to hear this, but the reality is, Mr. Speaker, we have workers and employers working together with academics to find out which works best for our apprentices, Mr. Speaker. They don't want to do that. They want to be the top downs, Mr. Speaker. What we're doing is we're building this. Mr. Speaker, the man the member over there is quite upset about getting it done. Mr. Speaker, more importantly than getting it done, we're going to get it done, and we're going to get it done right.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes on his final supplementary.
We're just waiting for when, because the government is delaying the apprenticeship review, Mr. Speaker. It's stalling on changing the ratio. And who can forget the backdoor union drive they created last year by forcing Nova Scotian apprentices to sign a union card in order to gain valuable work experience in Alberta? We all want apprentices to stay here and learn their trade here. And that's why we think it's time for the government to finally take action to make that happen. So my question to the minister, when will the government put the employment futures of young Nova Scotians ahead of the demands of special interest friends and implement the programs Newfoundland has successfully put in place?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you know, two members are asking the same question, Mr. Speaker. So, neither one makes sense. But, Mr. Speaker, we have never. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been no changes. You know, I don't know what planet that group lives on, Mr. Speaker, but there's been no changes, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we have allowed workers to freely move from Newfoundland, or whether from Prince Edward Island, or whether from Alberta. But, Mr. Speaker, the reality is he just wants us to holus bolus, take somebody else along. What we want to do is things, but the leadership of our Premier, we've met at CAP this week, and we're all working together. We're all a system that party doesn't understand, Mr. Speaker. We are working together. Apprentices will be trained here. They'll be working here, Mr. Speaker, and they'll be able to travel all across this country, not limited by like that group did, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government's recently announced its early years initiative. The announcement was typical of this government, grand photo ops and no details. The government's April 10th release states that the initiative will, and I quote, help bring seamless access to regulated childcare, early learning programs, early intervention, and parent education. So, Mr. Speaker, the only thing that is impeding any access to those services is this government's chronic underfunding of the organizations that deliver them. So my question to the minister, will the minister tell members of this House how much the government is investing in early intervention programs, those very programs that provide family-based services to our youngest?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We continue to invest in our early intervention programs, and I'm looking forward to working with the working group that we are going to be forming so we can be looking at all aspects of our early years in terms of their wages, accessibility, and affordability. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester North on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question was how much. The answer is $2.9 million to 23 agencies serving 900 families. And, Mr. Speaker, imagine, I wouldn't clap about it, imagine the surprise when the government announced an early years intervention with a focus on intervention without properly funding that. So my question to the minister is this: will the minister commit to putting her words into action and increase the funding for early intervention in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What we have done as a government that no other government has done, we've recognized the importance of the early years by creating a department within the Department of Education, Early Childhood Development Department. We are in a process of bringing all of our services from community services and health and wellness into one department so that we can look at our children from birth to age 6 so we can make sure that we're supporting our families and our children appropriately. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester North on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the present time, there are 200 families across this province who are on a wait list waiting for access to early intervention programs. And some of these families, Mr. Speaker, will have to do without the supports as their children age out of the program before they start school. Early interventionists and families are begging for more resources to serve their children and to address the wait list. So my question to the minister, what will it take for her NDP government to make kids a priority in this province and increase funding for early intervention?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And our young children and children that need earlier intervention are a priority of our government, and we are funding the programs. It is part of our budget process, and we are making sure that we are going to be looking at our children through our new department in a seamless manner to make sure that our children are getting the services they need across the province equitably. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North on a new question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, we know that it is the McCain Foundation that is funding the Early Learning Initiative in this province, and we congratulate and thank them for their commitment. So my question to the minister is this: why did the minister fail to acknowledge publicly that the Early Learning Initiative in this province is being funded by the McCain Foundation and not the Department of Education?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the McCain Foundation have been instrumental in the development of the work that we are doing here in the province. They were acknowledged publicly. We are working in partnership with them. They are contributing to our early years centres, along with it's a partnership. It is definitely a partnership, and they were acknowledged. And I will say again, we really appreciate the leadership that the McCain Foundation has provided the Department of Education. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The significant contribution from the McCain Foundation was not acknowledged in the throne speech. It was not acknowledged in the ministerial statement on the day of the announcement. It was not acknowledged in the press release on the day of the announcement, and I will table those documents so the minister can read them. The government's only commitment to the initiative is $1.2 million for the province-wide implementation of this. Educators and parents recognize that this is not adequate. So will the minister admit that without the McCain Foundation funding, the Early Learning Initiative would be one more program for kids that is underfunded in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you very much. I would just like to say that the early years, our sites that we are setting up, the three of them in the province, our budget included $450,000 for that, and $100,000 of that will be from the McCain Foundation. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Preston.
Mr. Speaker, the 2002 Dorsey Report on Workers' Compensation made a recommendation about benefits saying, quote, over time, increases to the index in benefits from 50% to 100% of the Consumer Price Index, end of quote, and I will table that. The Pictou County Injured Workers Association has been working to have these changes made to ensure that the injured workers are not forced into poverty. They are calling on the government to implement the full indexing of compensation benefits as per the Dorsey recommendations. My question is to the minister responsible for the Workers' Compensation Board. Mr. Speaker, why has this government done nothing with respect to this recommendation?
Minister responsible for the Workers' Compensation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I can say to that member, we inherited a mess with WCB, and it was all thanks to those guys in 99 and 96. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Preston on his first supplementary.
In other words, the minister is going to do nothing. Workers who were injured before 1990 were high hopes that the NDP would change legislation to ensure that all injured workers would be treated fairly. Injured workers are feeling ignored by this government. Will the minister tell those injured workers who were hurt before 1990 if they can expect to get treated equally by this NDP government and receive workers' compensation benefits?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Compensation Board.
Mr. Speaker, I should probably introduce that member to Jay Abbas, the former Minister of Labour, that put those onerous rules on it. Maybe the member can read the Hayden decision, Mr. Speaker, as he was a member of that former Liberal government, and decide what they've done, Mr. Speaker. That's what caused that stuff, Mr. Speaker. It's the hypocritical position of the Liberal Party and what they did to injure workers in this province. It's not this government, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Preston on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it seems that this government can only blame things on every other government around, everybody else around. They've been in government for 4 years, and have done nothing except ruin the economy. Since the NDP took office, power rates have gone up by 30%. Fuel costs are skyrocketing, taxes have increased, and people are finding it harder to make ends meet. Injured workers are a particularly difficult time because this government is more focused on penalizing employers through penalties rather than supporting workplaces and workers. It seems that this NDP has changed their stripes when it comes to protecting workers. Will the minister tell injured workers today, when they can expect any action from this government?
The honourable minister responsible for the Workers' Compensation Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I stand in my place as a proud person who represents many workers, Mr. Speaker, and I haven't changed any stripes, Mr. Speaker. When it came to automatic assumption, the former Minister of Labour passed a bill in here to protect coal miners, Mr. Speaker. That's action, Mr. Speaker. A couple of weeks ago, there was a bill in front of this House on protecting widows, Mr. Speaker. That's action. Action that was ignored by that lot, Mr. Speaker. We take action. We don't change stripes, Mr. Speaker. We do it.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thanks so much, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations. As the minister knows, Mr. Speaker, my area has over 9,000 apartment units in the Clayton Park riding, and a lot of those are small one-bedroom apartments, and people are very careful with their usage of energy often in those small apartments. And my question relates to the Heating Assistance Rebate Program, which when the NDP came to power in 2009, they cut from $450 per recipient down to a maximum of $200. Well, I have the form. There is no $450 rebate anymore. So the new program, the minister can say he didn't do it, but this program maximizes at $200. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, the point of this is that not only is there an income threshold to the access to this rebate, there is also an energy usage threshold. And if you don't, it says very clearly, and I'll table this from the website, government website, it says that you have to show you used at least 6,000 kilowatt hours of electricity in a 12-month period to get any rebate. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is exactly why they have a rebate threshold for usage when many low-income Nova Scotians are keeping the heat low in order to just manage. And I want to know why that's there.
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. And it's a good question. When we came into power, the threshold was 18,000 kilowatts. We reduced it to 10, then we reduced it to 6. I guess it would come down to, like lots of priorities and decisions that governments have to make, that at some point, you only have so much money for any particular program, so that we actually increased the number of people who could qualify by reducing from 18,000 kilowatts down to 6,000 kilowatts, Mr. Speaker. And I would say that, yes, maybe we could say you don't have to show any evidence of what power that you used, but we didn't want to be given a rebate if somebody used a hairdryer, Mr. Speaker. We wanted to make sure that they were actually heating their apartment or heating their home. So that really is the thinking behind it. At some point in the future, if government is able to take a look at that, I think we would be glad to do that. But we also offer money to the Salvation Army to help people in need as well. And so we'd always be interested in looking, but at some point, if the member has an interest in lowering that, then I have to ask her, what is it you'd like us to cut in order to do that, Mr. Speaker?
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's simply backward thinking to cut the very, very poorest people out of this rebate program. It's backward. The people living in small apartments who are keeping their temperature as low as possible and using as little energy as possible because they simply don't have the money to pay those bills. And they will have bills that are above the $200 that the minister is referring to as the threshold. I think it's not a way of making money. We're not suggesting it's a way to get money when you didn't spend it. It's a rebate program. The maximum would be what you had spent on your power, up to a $200 limit, which is already too small for many low-income people. It isn't even enough for people getting oil to have a delivery for $200. Mr. Speaker, the minister, I think, should review what he's saying. Perhaps in his answer to me he will. I'm saying there's very few people that this would affect, but they are the most vulnerable, the people that are really living in a very stark way. I've heard from these people in my riding, Mr. Speaker. They're people who have very little income and are keeping the temperature really low because they simply can't afford it, and they're the ones who are being kept out, Mr. Speaker, of the rebate program. I know it's May 1st, I know the weather's warmed up, but now's the time to think about how this program could be better next year. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, I'd like him to endeavour to tell me how many people may be affected by this threshold, by the usage threshold, and I'd like a commitment for him to reconsider that it be taken off.
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not opposed to reconsidering anything. I'd be glad to reconsider this going into next year. The member asked how many people that I think this might affect. I think that at every point when the government looked at setting the level, they always said that this will get the most of the people. Then they reduced it to 10,000 kilowatts from 18, thinking this would catch most of the people. Then we reduced it from 10 to 6, thinking this would catch most of the people. So I have to say that for complaints otherwise, that someone who actually contacts my department to say you have to lower this or they don't, and we look at those cases individually, we can help. I generally tell my staff, do something for this person. There are very few, extremely few. I'm thinking 2, maybe 3. The one thing I want to remind the member opposite is that we pay the HST on people's electrical bills in this province, something that turns out to be 10% of their electrical bill, which helps these people as well, something that her party voted against, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, if we read the Herald this morning, we would read about a letter from Jonathan Rosenthal. And in that, he commented on the delays in the Fenwick-McIntosh case as being outrageous, and they remain virtually unexplained. Now, last week, Mr. Speaker, the Premier said that he had asked the federal government to participate and to do the right thing in calling the inquiry. Does the minister believe that an inquiry must be done by the federal government, or is he just passing the buck?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much. I want to just advise the member and thank him for the question. But as early as this morning, I met with my staff and discussed this very issue further. And we're still looking, when we get an interim report from the Department of Public Prosecutions, to get a little bit of an update there. We should be getting the RCMP report within a week or so. Once I get that information, I think it's very critical in this matter that we acknowledge the abuse to individuals that made those allegations. We're sensitive to that. We're caring about that. I, too, share the same concern that the member does in getting to understand the complexity of this issue and how this happened and what we can do to ensure that it doesn't happen in the future. But in the interim, I really need to get the overall picture to understand, because such a historical context in this matter is required to be understood.
The Honourable Member for Inverness. On his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to make the point, Mr. Speaker, that the federal government did address the problem, and the Premier acknowledged that in earlier this or last week, that when the federal government was returned this predator back to Nova Scotia. Now, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate what the minister's saying here, but I think we on all sides of this House want to find out what went wrong. And we believe that this minister and his department do know what went wrong internally. They have access to that, and my question to the minister is, why won't the minister call an independent inquiry now to get answers for the victims of these horrible crimes?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the member. I just would like to explain to him a couple of things on the structure of our justice system in Nova Scotia. The public prosecutions is an independent unit under its own direction with its own director. That director has taken upon himself to do a review so that he understands what's occurred within the public prosecutions. At the same time, the RCMP is another branch of the justice system providing service within this province. They, in fact, as well as doing a review. So responsible on my part, then, is to collect this information. In the interim, I am gathering additional information on the historical relationship between this matter. And I don't want any Nova Scotian out there to be confused. I am committed to trying to find out and understand how this could occur. And so it's a matter of being well informed before I make a decision. I will not react in an inappropriate manner. I will be informed and will react accordingly.
The honourable member for Inverness on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can appreciate that this matter, and we know how long it's dragged on, and the whole reason that it was not productive in facing the whole reason the justices were not able to address this matter is because, and Mr. Speaker, I apologize, I think my blood sugar is a little low. I'm having difficulty concentrating, but, and I'm actually serious, but I want to make the point that that people have been waiting a long time, and I want to make that point to the minister that people are hoping that this minister will make sure that this happens quickly and that he honestly look at an independent inquiry. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, my question for the minister is that I hope that we can. My question once again for the minister, when will he look at doing an independent review?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
As I stated in my earlier part of my answer, it's very important that as the public prosecutions is an independent body at arm's length from this House here, that I do get the information from them, that I get the information from the police. And then we look at what's the best way to approach the concerns and the issues that are outlined there. There is an issue in this whole process about the renewing of the warrants, which we've raised with the federal government. We'll continue to do that. People waiting a long time, I understand that, and I think all Nova Scotians deserve an answer. And when I have the appropriate information to make an informed decision, I will make one. And we're hoping that sooner than later.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is, I guess, for the Minister of Energy. Earlier in question period today, the Premier talked about there being all these studies tabled in the Maritime Link hearings in favor of the Maritime Link thing. It's the lowest cost. The Minister of Energy yesterday said that 9 of 14 studies that were tabled, in fact, said that, and I will table his comments from yesterday. In fact, Mr. Speaker, he was only right about one thing, and that's that there were 14 studies tabled, and I'll table that, the list of the 14 studies. Mr. Speaker, of those 14 studies, in fact, only one of them says that the Maritime Link is the lowest and cheapest cost, and I will table all 14 studies, Mr. Speaker, so that maybe the minister, here you go, because maybe the minister will take some time to read them. Two of them offer no comment as they weren't asked to look on that. Two of them look only at whether the project is technically possible, which everybody agrees it is. One is against the project because it says it violates Aboriginal rights. And all of the remaining studies say that the Enerco study says the costs are underestimated. The Woolridge study says Emera is proposing a level of profit double what it should be and will gouge ratepayers. The Booth evidence says Emera is making too much money on the project. And the Anituk, Synapse, Leviton, Canwy, and LPRA evidence all say Emera overestimated fuel costs to make the project look better and the other options worse for ratepayers. So, Mr. Speaker, would the minister please explain why he's misrepresenting the evidence filed at the Utility and Review Board?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, there's a lot of evidence, obviously, as the honourable member is tabling some of it, and you know, again, I'll stick to my understanding. There's about 9 that were pro and 5 that were con in these connections, but you know, it all depends on your interpretation of how you read the evidence, I guess, and really the role of the UARB is to determine what is the evidence, what is the best information, and they have to test the evidence, they have to review the interveners' evidence, and they have to cross-examine everything that's there. So that is the role of the UARB, to look at all that evidence, determine what is right and what is fair. Is it the best deal for Nova Scotians?
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
No, Mr. Speaker, I really do hope the minister will take the time to read the 14 studies I tabled, which included his Dalton study, because only one of them actually said it's the lowest and fairest cost. Even if you include the 2 that don't talk about cost and say that the project is technically possible, and that's the only thing they looked at, you still only have 3 studies that say that that project are in favor of that project. Mr. Speaker, the minister should stop representing the facts. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Premier was saying that because the repeat recipient of the Fossil of the Day Award, Mr. Jim Prentice, said the Muskrat Falls is a good deal, it must be. Well, my goodness, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Premier is also aware that many financial magazines have speculated that CIBC, where Mr. Prentice works, is trying to actually get some of the loans and investments for that project. Mr. Speaker, if the minister truly believes that the evidence will support the deal currently proposed by Emera for Muskrat Falls, rather than made in Nova Scotia solutions, then why won't he extend the hearing? Mr. Speaker, the Premier and Minister may wish to put Newfoundland first. We want to put Nova Scotia first. Mr. Speaker, is the minister concerned that by giving the review board the time it takes to make a decision, it will become crystal clear that this deal is structured against Nova Scotians?
Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, obviously, we firmly believe that the Muskrat Falls Maritime Link is the best deal for Nova Scotians and will provide stable rates for 35 years. But since this spring session, maybe the fall session, maybe the spring before that, I've been trying to figure out what is the Liberal policy on energy. And, you know, I know they want to put the HST back on home energy. They want to eliminate efficiency in Nova Scotia. That'll cost over $100 million. They want to deregulate electricity, 30 to 50% increase in rates, and they want to cozy up to Hydro-Quebec. So what is the real energy policy for the Liberal Party?
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
You know, Mr. Speaker, it's this government's own Minister of Health that wrote a column suggesting we should get energy from Hydro-Quebec. So I'm not sure why he's criticizing us about that. Mr. Speaker, the Premier stood in this House and said that this project would allow us to get more energy from Hydro-Quebec, yet they're criticizing us for repeating what the Premier said. Mr. Speaker, yesterday on News 95.7, the Minister stated there would be thousands of jobs from the Maritime Link. Maybe, but not in Nova Scotia. And of course, he forgets to mention the jobs that will be lost at Lingan and that Nova Scotia has already come to acknowledge. Guess the government doesn't think the unemployment rate in Cape Breton is high enough. Mr. Speaker, so the NDP believes that a few temporary construction jobs is better than a made-in-Nova Scotia solution of renewable energy with long-term investment and long-term jobs here. So, Mr. Speaker, why does the NDP believe that short-term construction jobs, few of which will be in Nova Scotia, are better than the permanent jobs and investment that will come with made-in-Nova Scotia alternatives of renewable energy that almost all those studies endorse?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, the Lower Churchill Maritime Link will provide the lowest fares energy rates for Nova Scotians, but I'm still trying to figure out what the Liberal policy is on energy. I went to the Liberal website to try to find out. Here I have a copy of it. And one day they're up and one day they're down. But one day the leader of the Liberal Party said that the Lower Churchill is crucial to Nova Scotia's energy future. Another day, the Liberal leader says it's a bad deal for Nova Scotians, but great for Emera's. The honourable member for Dartmouth East said the Premier must ensure ratepayers are protected in the Lower Churchill deal. And again, the leader of the Liberal Party is saying the energy minister position in Lower Churchill is not going to work for Nova Scotia. So it's very, very difficult to figure out where they're at. Are they for the project or are they against the project? Are they supporting Hydro-Quebec or are they supporting Nova Scotians? I'll table that, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last year the economy of Nova Scotia stalled. In fact, in rural Nova Scotia, the economy contracted. Labour income growth was a slower pace than was observed during the recession, and retail sales were the slowest in 4 years. Mr. Speaker, this year the government fully expects that there will be 1,100 fewer Nova Scotians employed. There is already double-digit unemployment across the province, and Nova Scotia had the biggest dive in business optimism of any province in April. Mr. Speaker, with these facts in front of him, does the Minister of Economic and Rural Development still believe there's going to be a surge in personal income tax?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will ask the Minister of Finance to respond to that.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we put the budget estimates together this year, we do what is done every year, Mr. Speaker. We put the forecast together, the assumptions, we test them with economists in all of the major financial institutions in the country, the Conference Board of Canada, the Atlantic Provinces Economic Council, economists that are academics in our universities, and then we submit all of that to the Auditor General. And Mr. Speaker, all of that process resulted in the conclusion and the consensus among those folks that the economic estimates of the province were reasonable, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The unemployment rate in Nova Scotia is now 9.5%, and as we know, with Halifax weighing down that average, it's extremely high in most rural areas. Unemployment has increased in every region of this province since 2009. 0.2% growth is a clear indication that rural economies are shrinking, Mr. Speaker. Businesses state that energy is the #1 cost pressure, increasing 30% in the last 3 years. Business confidence is the very worst of any province in this country, Mr. Speaker. They are undisputed facts. I don't think any member of the government can say that anything that I just offered is incorrect. With the economic realities in Nova Scotia, how can the minister suggest that our province provides a sound environment for entrepreneurs?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with the investments that we made and the proof when we signed agreements with Michelin, with BlackBerry, Mr. Speaker, with projects, with all these companies, Mr. Speaker, the list goes on and on and on. And you know what, Mr. Speaker, there are still more to come. We reduced the small business tax, Mr. Speaker, 3 years in a row. Mr. Speaker, we are helping small businesses, Mr. Speaker. We've included the web portal so we can streamline and make things more efficient and quicker, reduce red tape for small business that are seeking all the programs that we offer. Cut to the chase, Mr. Speaker. They are investing in us. We still have, and the member wouldn't know this, but we have companies coming from all over the world, coming to Nova Scotia. We sit down, we talk to them, and we try to accommodate in the best interest of Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Transportation. Mr. Speaker, the province's 5-year paving plan was announced to address issues across Nova Scotia and to make certain a strategy was in place for paving and chip sealing. In the past, I've spoken to the former Minister of Transportation and now the current Minister and have put the concerns in writing to the current Minister. And those concerns are concerns of Nova Scotians about paving in subdivisions. And I want to acknowledge I did receive a written response back from the Minister. I appreciate that, and I thank you for that. My question to the Minister is this: will the Minister commit to meeting with municipal leaders as part of that discussion?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure, Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. As she's indicated, we have had some discussions about this, and we've actually exchanged correspondence. I'll meet with anyone who has a concern about their roads if they want to meet with me to discuss them, and I intend to. I guess it'll be on a first-come, first-served basis. In reference to this particular issue, again, it's a situation where we are prepared to work with people who have these J-class roads, municipalities who have these J-class roads, but of course it's a 50-50 shared investment, and if they want to come forward, we'll certainly look at their concerns. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The expensive costs and priority placed on paving and repaving the 100 series highways, as well as the routes and trunks in Nova Scotia. With that, with those added costs every year, subdivisions have become less of a priority, and they very rarely make it to that list. Many of those roads are identified, but there is never any funding for those, and thus the need for some plan to address those. So my question to the Minister is this: rather than waiting for municipalities to come to him, will he take the lead and go to the municipalities?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure, Renewal.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. I suppose the answer to that question is I'm available. I don't know in particular which municipalities want to discuss this issue with me. If they want to get in touch, I'm not trying to avoid getting in touch with anyone, but I don't know in particular until they come forward with their issue which municipalities would want that kind of attention. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we know Nova Scotia's economy is suffering. High unemployment, business closures, and shrinking opportunities make that very clear. Now we've learned that even those who have gone elsewhere for training and education are being turned away when they return home. Many working in trades have been told they're overqualified. Those people are unemployed. Despite their hard work, they're in the same position as 47,600 other Nova Scotians. So my question through you to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism: what does the Minister say to the people who are trying to call our province home again but are overqualified?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I welcome that question because, first of all, I want to say as a practitioner of diversity, and maybe not all members in the House will understand this, but there's no such thing as being overqualified for a job. There are minimum qualifications for a job, and if you're qualified, you're qualified. That's where it should end. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? Not all members may not understand that, and I would certainly welcome for those members that don't quite grasp that to come to me in her time, and I will try my darndest to explain what is meant by that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes on his first supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia doesn't have the capacity for these highly trained workers. More than 18,000 people left our province in 2012, and now we're telling them that our economy is too weak to welcome them home. The message we're sending to young people is not inspiring, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotians want to be here. We should be able to offer them the same opportunities they have elsewhere, and we should never turn them away because they have succeeded. So my question to the Minister: when will the Minister finally address the problems in our economy and put Nova Scotia in a position to welcome growth and skilled labour?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's quite obvious that this government has welcomed growth, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the things that we've done when we stand here, or certainly when I stand in my place, and I talk about those strategic investments that we have made so that companies can grow, where new companies can come here, which members from the opposite parties have criticized or spoke against, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, we made that investment in Port Hawkesbury New Page, Mr. Speaker. 1,400 jobs associated with that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, nobody on this side of the House disagreed with that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members on the opposite side of the House disagreed with that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we make those investments regarding 10,000 employees, current employees, so that they can improve upon their skills, Mr. Speaker, that's investment in Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are making strategic investments, and we will continue to do so.
The Honourable Member for Victoria de Lakes on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, the expensive policies of this government have had entirely negative impacts on business development in this province. The NDP have shown no desire to keep our young people from going west to find good jobs. They either can't find a job here or they're too qualified for a job here. That's not a very inspiring message for future generations. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to you, to the Minister, when will the Minister turn what looks like a have-not province and do what needs to be done to make it a have province for future generations?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We did that 3 years ago when we were elected, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to do it, Mr. Speaker. We are improving the economy. We are improving the opportunities for Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just wondering if I could ask a question to the Deputy Premier. Will he support the CBRM capital plan?
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Yes, we have, Mr. Speaker.
The time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. I will now recognize the House Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Oh. Sorry, we're having a little fight over here. Oh, who's speaking first? Mr. Speaker, can you call Bill number 64?
Bill number 64. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am delighted to rise and speak in support of Bill 64, which in basic terms is a bill to allow the UARB, the review board, to do the job that it's always been able to do in the past, which is to hold hearings on behalf of ratepayers and take the time they need and set their own timeline to review all the evidence and then make a decision that's in the best interest of electricity ratepayers of Nova Scotia. But Mr. Speaker, it's kind of sad that we need a bill like this today because for the first time, on probably one of the biggest projects that this review board or any review board will ever face, they don't have that ability. And the reason they don't have that ability, Mr. Speaker, is because the Premier or the NDP, they passed a bill in this legislature last year and put it in law that the URB doesn't get to set its own agenda to review a $1.5 billion 35-year project. In fact, they passed a law which essentially says they must approve the project within 6 months of the date of application if the project is consistent with the NDP's electricity plan. Well, Mr. Speaker, we all know where this is going. That the government, afraid that the UARB might actually come to a conclusion different than what the government wants, has handcuffed their ability to do their job. And that is not right, Mr. Speaker. That is not right. And the evidence that it's not right is piling up every day. It's piling up in the reams of expert opinions that are flowing in that question whether this is truly the best way forward for our province, whether it's truly the best project environmentally for Labrador, whether it's truly the lowest cost option for Nova Scotians. Thousands and thousands of pages, thousands of charts and graphs and projections that need a thorough examination, not just for today, Madam Speaker, but for all time. Now, if today's Nova Scotians and tomorrow's Nova Scotians are going to look back on this time and see if the government truly did its homework before it committed them to this big project, then they need to know that before their NDP government signed on the dotted line, that they did their homework and that they allowed the UARB to do its homework. But, Madam Speaker, this government is failing on both accounts. First, they didn't do their own homework. The Premier signed on the dotted line a year and a half ago, before he knew the cost of the project to our homes and our businesses, before all of the evidence had been collected. Rather than sit back and say, I'm responsible to the taxpayers of Nova Scotia and the ratepayers, so I'm not going to jump on board until I get all of the facts on their behalf, he couldn't wait to have that press conference a year and a half ago and announce his support, and then sign on the dotted line. Madam Speaker, in fact, he's already allowed Emera to begin work on the project, even before the UARB starts these hearings that are going to begin later this month. Madam Speaker, the Premier has failed in his job, which is to represent the taxpayers and ratepayers first, before jumping on board and get excited about a project that costs so much. So then Nova Scotians, giving up on their Premier, turn to the UARB as the one place where they are supposed to be protected and represented to determine whether this is the best option or not. Seeing that happen, Madam Speaker, the government passed a bill that short-circuits the usual UARB process, gives them a very tight timeline, which the consumer advocate, the small business advocate, both opposition parties, and many Nova Scotians have said it's not enough time for a decision of this magnitude. So it's a shame, Madam Speaker, that we have to have a bill like this one today to set matters right. I know the Premier's mind is made up and we can't change it, regardless of the cost. He wants this project. What we can fix is to give the UARB back the tools that they usually have to do their job, and that is to let them set their own timeline, to do a thorough review compared to all of the other options. That is the only way Nova Scotians will ever have confidence in this project to know whether it's the right one or not. In fact, Madam Speaker, I believe that Dan Legier, a journalist with the Chronicle Herald, got it right when he said a few days ago that the NDP, he says, have shown their, and I quote directly, tub-thumping support for the Labrador Link and friendly dealings with Nova Scotia Power. That is why Nova Scotians are so nervous about where the NDP are taking us, Madam Speaker. Now, at some point in the future, Nova Scotians will be asked to judge the power policies of the government and of all parties in this House. Mr. Legier has given them a heads up both on the tub-thumping support for a project that they don't know the costs of on the government side, and for their, and I quote, friendly dealings with Nova Scotia Power. He also points to the policy of the Liberal Party, where he says some of the chatter on rates from them has been downright simplistic. You can't just wave a wand and break Nova Scotia Power's monopoly, he says. Barriers to entry are too high for that. And even if you could, it wouldn't guarantee lower prices. I hear some members saying they did in other places, and that's right. He points out Ontario broke up its monopoly in 1999, and prices have risen there steadily since. New Brunswick, same policy. Their own auditor determined it was an absolute failure, Madam Speaker. The government wants as much green energy as they can, regardless of the price, right now. We want green energy within the current rates, within a rate freeze. Go green as fast as Nova Scotians can afford. Only the Liberal Party has found a policy which both raises our prices and kills investment in renewable energy at the same time. That's quite an accomplishment, Madam Speaker. And those, in summary, are the positions of the three parties. Do they want higher prices and no renewables because no one's going to invest in them under the Liberal policy? Do they want renewables at a pace that we can afford, which is the PC policy, or do they want the tub-thumping support for the Labrador Link and friendly dealings with Nova Scotia Power of the NDP? That is what Mr. Legier has highlighted for all Nova Scotians. I want to commend him on his work, and I will table that for the benefit of the House. So, Madam Speaker, now that I've outlined the differences of approach between the three parties, I will say this. I truly hope that when it comes to something as obvious as allowing the Utility and Review Board to do their work on their own timeline to review all the information on a $1.5 billion 35-year project, that all parties can come together today and support this bill so we can look today's Nova Scotians and future Nova Scotians in the eye and know that we did the right thing in the right time in the right way. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Now recognize the honourable member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'm glad to stand in my place to respond to some of the comments from the leader of the Conservative Party. Of course, asking questions of a game-changing project is certainly a thing that we should be doing as Nova Scotians. We should be asking questions, absolutely. And so, but the real question in this whole debate, Madam Speaker, and I'm really glad that the Conservative Party brought this bill forward today, so that we can have another discussion and that at least another Nova Scotian who might be listening might understand where or in fact where the Liberal Party stands on the question of Maritime Link. Are they in support of the Maritime Link? And that is the real question here, Madam Speaker. We know where the Conservative Party stands. We know where our party stands and our government stands on the Maritime Link. But the one thing we don't know, Madam Speaker, is where the Liberal Party stands on the question of the Maritime Link. And the reason why we don't know where they stand, Madam Speaker, is they just simply can't make up their mind. They can't make up their mind on this whole question of this game-changing project that will bring stable rates to our province, Madam Speaker, that will be a part of an overall plan for renewable energy in this province, something that the other two parties didn't have the foresight to do when they were in government. And so this is exactly what this government is doing, Madam Speaker, is a plan for renewable energy, a plan that will see great result, Madam Speaker. We'll see great result for our future generations. The federal Conservative government is coming down with greenhouse gas emission reductions, and we need to. The reality is the Liberal Party doesn't actually have a plan to address those. So, Madam Speaker, and so if you just go and Google, Madam Speaker, the Liberal Party, and the Minister of Energy already tabled the document today, but. You just go and Google what the Liberal Party stands for on the Muskrat Falls. And so at one time there's a headline that says, Lower Churchill crucial to Nova Scotia's energy future. They said that at one point. I remember the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Liberal Party was in 2008 over in Newfoundland saying how wonderful this project is going to be for Nova Scotians. And then another release comes out from the Liberal Party, Madam Speaker, and it says, Lower Churchill, bad deal for Nova Scotians, Madam Speaker. And then another release comes out from the Liberals, Madam Speaker, says, Leader of the Opposition supports Energy Minister's position on Lower Churchill. So one day they say one thing, Madam Speaker, another day they say another thing, and that's just a typical Liberal thing, Madam Speaker, to know. And I consider myself a young man, Madam Speaker, and I haven't been in politics too long, but that's typical with Liberals. Typical with Liberals. One day they say one thing, the next day they say another. And so, Madam Speaker, that's exactly where they stand, is they don't know, right? But one thing we do know about the Liberal Party is that they will cozy up to Hydro-Quebec at any point and at any time, for sure. Madam Speaker, we know that Nova Scotians want change when it comes to how we generate our power, our electricity in this province, and they want change with electricity, Madam Speaker. They no longer want to have the majority of our power produced by dirty imported coal that's traded on the international market, Madam Speaker. They don't want that. They don't want that. That's why in the last 7 years our power rates have gone up by 75%. That is exactly why the international price of coal has gone up by 75% in this province, Madam Speaker. So that's the reality, and that's the position of the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. That's what they wanted us to do, Madam Speaker. They want us to stay on that road. Other provinces saw the foresight to get off that dirty energy. Nova Scotia lagged behind. It was the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party that saw that, Madam Speaker. I had the opportunity, Madam Speaker, to go across Nova Scotia with the Minister of Energy, talking to everyday Nova Scotians. And I certainly saw a lot of head nodding in the rooms that we were in, Madam Speaker. Over 500 people, everyday Nova Scotians that we talked to, talking about the Maritime Link and the types of economic development, the types of opportunities that this project will see for our province. That, Madam Speaker, is something, again, we don't see from the other two parties, Madam Speaker. We don't see that. Absolutely. I think one of the things we need to do is begin to understand the project, and that's exactly the sort of thing that we did as a government when we brought forward the Maritime Link Act, Madam Speaker. That's exactly what we did. We brought forward an act that will allow us to move forward with a project that will give us energy security in our province of Nova Scotia, Madam Speaker. And that was an important step. In fact, Madam Speaker, I stood and I sat in this place when I heard members of the opposition from both parties say that they supported the Maritime Link Act, Madam Speaker. In fact, I know on May 10th of last year, the member from Argyle actually said, I think all parties in this House have spoken to this issue on a number of occasions, and I can say that our party will be supporting this bill because it is something we've talked about for a really long time as well. And in fact, on May 17th, the member from Dartmouth East said, I think we will certainly support the bill. My hope would be that the Minister and the Premier would actually be willing to consult with the opposition parties on some of the issues that should be covered in the bill. Or even they ultimately don't agree with this, at least if the Minister and the Premier would seek out our feedback in terms of what issues should be covered by those regulations. We would certainly appreciate the opportunity, and we hope the Minister and the Premier will do so, Madam Speaker. And I will certainly table that, Madam Speaker. Absolutely, I will table that. And so, Madam Speaker, we had the opportunity, in fact, in a news release, Madam Speaker, a news release that went out to all Nova Scotians asking for comments on the regulations. Who did we not hear from? The Liberal Party. No, not once has the Liberal Party brought forward any idea around regulations. Not once, Madam Speaker. Neither from the Conservative Party, Madam Speaker. So he can chirp on over there all he wants, but he did not do that, Madam Speaker, and we know that. We know that, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, the Liberals talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk, Madam Speaker. They don't. They say things in here and they say something different out there, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, consultation around the regulations spanned over 2 months last summer. And the Liberal Party didn't bring forward any ideas around timelines, nothing. But now they say that they think that there needs to be more time, Madam Speaker. We believe that there's sufficient time, Madam Speaker. We believe that there's sufficient time to consult, to bring forward things that will ensure that this project, the Maritime Link, will move forward in our province, Madam Speaker. In fact, even the federal government, let's remember the federal Conservative government came on board to guarantee the project, saving ratepayers $100 million. And in the last federal election, Madam Speaker, all three parties All three parties, the Liberal Party, the NDP, and the Conservatives all supported the project, Madam Speaker. All parties. All parties. All parties, Madam Speaker. Every single party. So you know, Madam Speaker, that's where this party stands. I really wish the Liberal Party would stand up and finally tell Nova Scotians where they stand on this project, because nobody knows. One thing we know, Madam Speaker, is that they're moving forward with Quebec Hydro.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm not sure if I'm more sad that I think the member might actually believe some of the stuff that he spews, or whether it's that that his government actually lets him stand up and say some of those things and misrepresent the positions of others. If the government can't stand, if the government can't actually stand on its own facts and has to misrepresent everybody else around them, then you know that they're in trouble. You know, Madam Speaker, we said, and we were the member talked about Googling things. Well, his Googling was selective, because if he had Googled, he actually would have found that last year during the regulations, we made a statement well quoted in the media that in fact his own minister responded to, saying that we would endorse the position of the consumer advocate, and if the consumer advocate felt at that time that he was satisfied with the things around the time, that's fine. So that was fine. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? The consumer advocate has come forward and said, you know what? There's an issue here. A lot more information has come forward. So the question becomes, why is it that this member believes that this timeline should be strangled? Well, let's look at what's happened. In Newfoundland, they put an artificial timeline on the Utility and Review Board there, and the board decided it could not come to a decision. As a result, the government had to legislate the project. Why would this government want to make the same mistake here? The NDP can go on about talking about flip-flopping to try and muddy the waters, but that's not true at all. In fact, what we said all along was that we supported the development of Muskrat Falls in principle with the right deal for Nova Scotians. Well, Madam Speaker, even when the Muskrat Falls Act came before this House, that deal was not available. In fact, that deal was not tabled in the legislature until January 28th. So this is a premier and a government that decided that they would support the project before they even knew what the deal was. We said yes. Having an energy loop makes sense. In fact, we have continued to acknowledge that there is a strategic value in that link. But much like some of the interveners in the evidence filed by people on behalf of the consumer advocate and the board, we have said there is a better deal for Nova Scotians. And if Emira does not want to put that forward, well, then we will not stand by a deal that breaks the backs of Nova Scotians, that will raise power rates, that will ensure that 35 years from now, when the deal runs out, we don't have access to that energy. The fact that when we move along, Madam Speaker, we stand by the evidence. Madam Speaker, there are 14 studies filed, and all the ones that talked about alternative options, with the exception of one, said that the cheaper, better, longer-term solution for Nova Scotia is made in Nova Scotia, investing in jobs in Nova Scotia with renewable energy in Nova Scotia. In fact, they said that the Newfoundland Hydro project, the Nalcor project, the Muskrat Falls project was the most expensive of any of the options they looked at. Now, Madam Speaker, the government obviously doesn't believe any of those experts. Apparently, the member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville knows more about energy policy, knows more about finances than every single one of those well-respected international experts. And I'm glad they have someone like that on their back benches to help them out with that. I'm amazed that the board hasn't called him to do all the evidence for them, since he's obviously knows much more than all those interveners. So what we're saying is, if they're so sure, if the government is so sure that they are correct on this, then they have nothing to lose but to give the board the time it asked for. In fact, during the consultations that the member just spoke of, where they asked about the regulations, the board said 6 months was the absolute minimum time, and in fact, they should be allowed to have as much time as they want. Well, Madam Speaker, is that too much to ask? If they truly believe that this should be a nonpartisan project, if they truly believe this should have the support of Nova Scotians, then maybe they should stand up and allow the independent board, which previously they spoke so highly of, the time that they want to make that decision. After all, what is the rush? The project's already under construction. The construction is not going to slow down. Madam Speaker, there are options here. And the government has an option to stand up and to say, you know what, we believe so much in this project, we believe that the evidence will prove that the government is right, that we'll let the board make a decision, we'll let the board do their review. But no, they don't want to give that information. They've stood up and said no to the small business advocate. They stood up and said, small business advocate who, if I recall correctly, they brought in the legislation to create that position as in their first term in government. Yet now they're saying, whoa, no, don't criticize us. Don't tell us we're doing something wrong. You're supposed to stand there and back up the government, not point out issues where we could improve. And they're doing the same thing to the consumer advocate. So, Madam Speaker, who are Nova Scotians to believe? The consumer advocate, the small business advocate, or the government that signed on to a deal before they even knew what the deal was? It makes no sense. We said all along, we said having that strategic link makes a lot of sense. Of course it does. Of course it makes sense to have that strategic link. But we said the deal has to be right for Nova Scotians. And in fact, many interveners in the evidence I tabled earlier today pointed out to different deal structures which would benefit ratepayers. Madam Speaker, the government's own expert, John Dalton, looked at a cost structure for a lifespan of that undersea link of over 70 years in the evidence he filed the other week. Emera's own evidence says the line will only last for 50 years. Why would you do a study on the cost of energy coming across the link for 70 years when the line, that's 20 years beyond the lifespan of the line? And those are the kind of things that the interveners have pointed out that are fundamentally flawed. You know, Madam Speaker, I had a chance to speak at the Renewable Energy Conference the other week. The minister refused to go. You know, I give credit to the leader of the third party for going, even though he wants to extend coal. He was happy to stand up in front of them. You know, he was happy to stand up in front of people who disagreed vehemently with his position. But he went, but the minister wouldn't go. The Minister of Energy wouldn't show up, despite 3 days, at least, I know of 3 days of requests, because we were copied on the emails, maybe there were more. He wouldn't show up to tell them what their plan was. And I find that, and yet, you know, and so you look at that and you say, why is this so confusing? You know, Madam Speaker, we believe, and increasingly there is evidence coming out from many organizations that supports the fact that allowing renewable energy producers access to the grid makes sense, has reduced rates in every jurisdiction where it's been done. And now we have evidence before the board saying that that actually would be the cheaper option for ratepayers. So this is the fundamental part of this bill is just saying give them more time. It's not even saying don't approve the link or approve the link. It's just saying if you truly believe that the link is the best option for Nova Scotia, is the cheapest option, as the government keeps saying, then let the board make that decision. Let the board make that decision. And why shouldn't they have the time that they need, that they feel they need? We're not saying let the legislature make an artificial decision. We're saying let an independent body, the Utility and Review Board, the time it needs. So we avoid the mistake that happened in Newfoundland where the board came to the end and couldn't make a decision. What's the government going to do if they come out on July 28th and say, I'm sorry, we didn't have enough time? Well, the government will either have to abandon the project or they'll have to legislate it. And I'm sure they don't want to get stuck in that kind of position. But of course, they know that by then, there'll probably be a different government. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And it's a pleasure for me to stand up today and have a little chat about Bill number 64, the Maritime Link Act. And it's a very short act. Well, what it says basically is that you allow the URB to have the time it needs to make a proper decision. Madam Chair, this would be what my children would call a no-brainer. It's a common sense bill, and I guess that's probably why we're not getting any support for it, because it is about common sense. It's about making sure that the deal that is being entered into is a deal that's good for all Nova Scotians. It's a deal that's going to tie us into this for 35 years, Madam Speaker. So if we're going to be tied into something for 35 years, let's be sure we get it right the first time. You know, Madam Speaker, there's an old saying that a lot of the old carpenters from around home use. They say, measure twice and cut once. And there's a reason for that. That means that don't rush into something too quickly, or it'll end up costing you more. Measure twice, cut once. Well, all we're asking here in this bill is to make sure that the right decisions are made at the front end, not at the back end. So if it takes a little longer to make the right decision, isn't that what we should be doing? Isn't that our job as members of this House of Assembly? Madam Speaker, I couldn't help but listen to the comment of the member from Dartmouth East, and he talked about coal, and he talked about how this party wants to go to coal. Well, he's a very knowledgeable individual, and if you would look at the energy plan that has been put out by the government of the province of Nova Scotia, he would know that coal is going to be used till 2040. What we're advocating for, instead of bringing that coal in from overseas, why wouldn't we use Nova Scotia coal? Why wouldn't we put Nova Scotians to work? And why wouldn't we make that part of what we have to do in order to move forward to get to a more sustainable energy system here in the province of Nova Scotia? So, getting back to this particular bill, let's make sure that we take a thorough look at the project. 14 reports, only one that identifies it as the best route to take. Now, I'm not an expert on any of this, and I don't know how many in this House are, but what I do know is if you have 14 reports and it shows some real concerns by the consumer advocate, who's out there to look after the individual rights and concerns of the people that are going to end up paying for this? Well, I would say to you, Madam Speaker, that's worth listening to. That's something we should be doing. And if we have a decision against it, we should have at least made sure that we looked at it hard and understood what it is that he is telling us. That's what this bill asks, Madam Speaker. It's just common sense, as I said earlier. Do your homework and get it right. There's nothing wrong with that. We tell our children that all the time. Make sure you have all the facts before you make a decision. I heard earlier today the Minister of Service Nova Scotia saying basically the same thing. You have to have all the facts in order to make a decision. And he's a pretty sound individual, Madam Speaker.
Physically.
Now, Madam Speaker, it's hard to understand. It's hard for Nova Scotians to understand why this government is in such a hurry to push this mega project through in only 180 days. 180 days. Something that's going to have an impact on this province for 35 years, and they want to make a decision in 180 days. After all, Madam Speaker, we will be paying this for over 3 decades. So if it turns out to be a mistake, it'll be a costly mistake, and it'll be a long time before we know the final impact. Madam Speaker, I believe, and our party believes, and the people of Nova Scotia believe, this project needs and deserves a thorough, independent review. 180 days will not allow that, Madam Speaker. $1.5 billion in 35 years. That's 2 generations, Madam Speaker. 2 generations of Nova Scotians that will be on the hook for what is being rammed through by this NDP government. Now, Madam Speaker, don't we, as members of this House of Assembly, don't we owe it to our kids and our grandkids to take a really close look at this project and make sure it's the right project for them and not just a trophy for the Premier? The Premier wants to make sure that he has a legacy to leave behind Nova Scotia. Well, I want to tell you, he probably is right in trying to get a legacy because this is going to be his last kick at the can. But it should be a legacy that he can be proud of, not one that's going to have an impact on the children and grandchildren of the people of the House of Assembly and the residents of the province of Nova Scotia. I believe that we owe our children and our grandkids more than just 180 days of consideration on a project of this size. We owe our families time that it needs to be taken. Like I said earlier, Madam Speaker, measure twice, cut once. Make sure you get it right now and not worry about it when we get down the road and decide that it's been the wrong decision for this province. It seems, Madam Speaker, that the Premier wants to make this project go ahead regardless of what anybody else has to say. Madam Speaker, here's what the Premier said to the Cape Breton Post in March, and I quote, "People, I think, may think that this has to do with the URB hearing, but this project is going ahead, and the only question is, how's that going to happen?" And Madam Speaker, I tabled that article. So he says it's going ahead regardless. They tell us that the URB is going to be the one that's going to make the decision, but he's already determined that it's going ahead regardless. Is that the way to treat Nova Scotians? He ran on a platform of a better deal for the families in Nova Scotia. Well, how is that a better deal? By telling them they're going to have it regardless of what the URB says. Madam Speaker, that's not right. This government should measure twice and check once, and they're not doing that. It's 180 days. It's not enough time for this project to have a clear view of what it is. So Nova Scotians expect and deserve that the 14 reports that have been filed should be looked at. Last week, as I said earlier, the consumer advocate and the small business advocate said they needed more time to review the project. They asked the minister to give them more time. And I'm telling you, that's not happening. This bill would allow that happen. This bill would allow the people of Nova Scotia time to make sure that we're getting it right and not leaving it to the period of time so that in 35 years' time, we're still paying for the mistakes of today, that your children, my children, and the children of all the people of the province of Nova Scotia aren't paying for the mistakes of that Premier. Thank you very much.
Recognize the acting House Leader for the Progressive Conservative Party.
We call bills for second reading, Madam Speaker. Bill number 4, the Balanced Budget Act.
Now call Bill number 4. Now recognize the Honourable Member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I think my blood sugar's returned, so my brain is firing again. I'll be able to give a speech here. I want to thank the members who were so kind to come forward so quickly with some sustenance from all sides of the legislature. It makes it harder to give a speech now and say anything bad about anybody.
I know you'll find a way.
But I'll find a way, I guess, yeah.
Did you see what was in something?
Well, Madam Speaker, this bill is a bill we put forward because we believe, first of all, that it's a bill that a responsible government would put forward, and we would live up to what we say in government, the things that we're saying today in opposition. Madam Speaker, the first part of the bill talks about controlling expenditure. And nobody likes to control expenditure. We would all like to have bottomless wallets and purses. But the reality is there always is a bottom unless we go and borrow money. And Madam Speaker, this bill is designed to force governments to be controlled in their spending and to limit that spending based on the population of the province. So if the population is not growing, we should not be spending more. Why, Madam Speaker? Because one of the chief determinants of GDP is a growing population. When populations are growing, that helps to drive the economy, and of course, that drives tax revenue. But if the population is not growing, where we see ours in Nova Scotia is very flat, we should be controlling our expenditure and ensuring that if we're not growing and our economy is not growing, we should not have government spending beyond its means. Because, Madam Speaker, we're only sinking ourselves further into a situation where an economy like ours can't recover and can't grow because it puts more pressure on the activities, on the risk-taking in the economy that takes place by small businesses because they're taxed more. It takes away from their ability to compete in a global world. We know many of our businesses in the province are competing outside of this province. And the businesses that aren't competing on a global basis, most of those businesses are dependent on those businesses that are competing globally. And I can tell you about a reception I was at last week, Madam Speaker, with the Manufacturers Association. And one of them told me it's all about manufacturing when you think about it. If we don't have companies in Nova Scotia manufacturing, if you take that away, all the remaining companies that provide services to those companies are suddenly losing revenue from their ability to sell to those manufacturing companies. So, Madam Speaker, we must remember that every business in this province depends on an economy that is competitive in a global environment. So, Madam Speaker, I think about the other point was, one was population, the other was inflation. If inflation is growing, then something can be said about that, about the need for government to spend more because its costs are going up the same as everybody else's costs are going up. And in the case of government, it might be cost for fuel, for government vehicles, the same as it might be cost for fuel for your average Nova Scotian in their monthly home budget. So this bill requires government to limit its year-over-year percentage increase in spending based on whether or not the population of the province is growing and based on the inflation rate of the province. Now, what have we seen in recent years? Well, we've seen after this year, in the recent budget, $1.67 billion in debt. And Madam Speaker, that works out to about $1,700 per person in the province. And that's for every person, including the 5-year-old that is going to start school or maybe has started school this past year. That's $1,700 more that they owe and that we all each owe just to pay for what's happened in the past 5 years. So, Madam Speaker, that to me is irresponsible, and that's why we're putting this bill forward so that that can't happen in the future. We also look at the fact that I'm going to raise this point about the HST in a minute, but I want to make the point that if we don't do something to control spending now, it just spirals out of control. So a government that doesn't tighten the reins and bring budgets into balance, as soon as it starts adding budget deficits every year, it starts adding increased interest payments on the debt every year thereafter to pay for that incremental debt. So the next point about this bill is that it requires the Minister of Finance to table a budget that is balanced. And people say, well, governments can't always run balanced budgets. And I believe in economies that are cyclical, and I think of resource-based economies like Alberta. They certainly have had periods in their history where, because of the cyclical nature of their economy, because of the oil and gas there, one could see them needing to run deficit budgets. But in this province, I think we've run them for far too long, and we've run them at points in history when they weren't necessary. And Madam Speaker, the problem with it is it's all those things that I've just been speaking about, that we're just adding more debt. And if we look at our Nova Scotian economy, our economy is very defensive. We have 1 in 3 people who work for the government, and as we know, Madam Speaker, very stable part of the economy. So we don't have fluctuations in our economy to the same degree as they would in a place like Alberta. And also, Madam Speaker, while we don't have those fluctuations, I'm going to move on from that. I want to talk about HST, because I know I only have a couple of minutes left here. And in terms of the HST, we've seen the federal government reduce HST by 2%, which certainly helps people by placing more money, keeping more money in their pockets when they go to buy things, and keeping more money in the economy. What we've seen, Madam Speaker, is this government take that away, take that benefit away, and increase the HST by 2%. And Madam Speaker, that is putting strain on the economy, and it's taking money out of people's pockets to the tune of $1,000 per person since that increase in tax has been implemented by this government. So, Madam Speaker, this bill would reduce the provincial portion of the HST back to 8%. And we believe, Madam Speaker, that that is something that would help the economy. So all of these things are important in our minds because one of the most important things we can be doing is creating an economy where entrepreneurs in this province can create jobs. Because when people have jobs, that takes care of a lot of the problems people face every day. They can pay their bills, they're gainfully engaged in something that they enjoy, they feel productive, and we know, Madam Speaker, that certainly has social benefits. When people are feeling good about their state in life, families are healthier. We see less instances of abuse, and of course we know that that saves government money too, Madam Speaker. So with this kind of legislation, I believe we will build a better economy. And with a better economy, we can grow tax revenues through that economic growth instead of increasing taxes. That is the direction we would like to take this province, Madam Speaker. And with that, I will conclude my remarks. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to join in the debate on Bill 4. The third party's bill on balanced budgets. You know, Madam Speaker and members of this chamber, Tommy Douglas balanced 17 budgets in the province of Saskatchewan when he was the Premier. And he did it without having to have any legislation like this in place. And he did it because he had common sense, and he had compassion, and he had values that said it's important to live within your means, and at the same time deliver good public services for the people of Saskatchewan and the things they needed. And these are the values and the philosophy of this government. Madam Speaker, our government committed to balancing the budget before we were elected in 2009, and we believe that balanced budgets are the most responsible way for governments to manage public money. However, we do not subscribe to the idea that you have to have a rigid set of rules that you always need to follow regardless of the circumstances. You have to look at the circumstances in which you govern and govern accordingly. And, you know, when we came into government, it's well accepted that we did so during the worst global recession in decades. And governments require, in those conditions, some flexibility. Imagine if a government in a global recession withdrew their spending capacity right at the same time that your economy is contracting because the private sector is contracting. The hardship that that would impose on the people the small and medium businesses in your province. And in fact, history is there for us to see when that in fact occurred. And there's quite a large body of information and analysis on the Great Depression and why it lasted so long. And in many cases, there were governments that were fundamentally opposed to using their capacity as government to borrow, to spend, and to try to even out the difficulties that people were experiencing during a recession. And we have to remember that during those times, the Great Depression, there were no social programs either. There are many lessons we've learned from the Great Depression. Many of us have learned, but apparently the Conservative Party isn't one of those entities that has learned from the Great Depression. When we came to government, we sought the advice of expert economists, the best in our region, and they confirmed that we had inherited a structural deficit left behind by the leader of the third party. And they advised us, they in fact supported the Premier's decision to rescind previously legislated balanced budget legislation. And let me read precisely what they say in their report for the members here, and I will table this after I read this. On page 1 of their report, they say, the panel supports the province's decision to rescind the balanced budget legislation and urges that it not replace it with another rigid set of fiscal rules. So we followed the recommendations of the expert panel, and we also listened to Nova Scotians. They recommended that we do a very broad-based consultation, and the former Minister of Finance did precisely that. And the outcome of that was a plan to get us back to balance over a 4-year cycle. We are one of only 4 provinces in Canada with a balanced budget this year, and we will be the only province in Atlantic Canada with a balanced budget. And we are very proud of that fact. We have had to make some hard decisions, but we've also made some very compassionate decisions. We reduced the unsustainable level of government spending that went on for a decade under the previous Conservative government, but we didn't adopt austerity as our mantra. We didn't rush to balance at any cost. We worked with our municipal and federal partners to improve our roads and our infrastructure, to keep Nova Scotians working during tough times. We reined in the 6 to 8% year-over-year increases in spending that the opposition, particularly the official opposition, likes to call cuts, when in fact what it was a slowing of the rate of growth in departmental spending. And regardless of the political rhetoric, Madam Speaker, we soldiered on and brought forward a plan that did not slash programs like other governments had done, with the incredibly negative consequences that we have seen. We temporarily raised the HST by 2 points, and I'd like to point out that this bill is redundant in that it purports to legislate what already is in legislation, which is a gradual reduction in the HST beginning in July of 2014. And indeed, we reined in the rate of growth in spending. And we also offset some of these impacts of tax increases on the lowest Nova Scotians, lowest income Nova Scotians, by introducing the affordable living tax credit and the poverty reduction tax credit, as well as initiatives that would assist seniors, low-income seniors receiving the guaranteed income supplement, so they no longer would pay provincial income tax. So all Nova Scotians have shared in getting our province back to balance, but everyone as well will share in the benefits of the hard work as we return to a more favorable financial position. We have been able in the budget, as a result of the balanced approach we took, we've been able to reinvest in important things: children's health, children's dental, things that have been cut by previous governments, both Liberal and Conservative governments. And in that way, our budget is truly balanced, Madam Speaker. And with those few remarks, I'll take my seat.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Halifax, Clayton Park.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker, and I'm happy to join the debate today here on Opposition Day. We're debating a Tory bill, a Conservative bill number 4, called the Balanced Budget Act. But really the debate has been wide-ranging, as is clear from anybody who's been paying attention. And again, the bill itself is rather simplistic. And I noticed the minister saying things like there's no need for legislation and we don't need to be so rigid or have a rigid set of rules like that. But I think what Nova Scotians need to know is that there was balanced budget legislation in the province, and that it was repealed when the NDP came to power. So when they had the first opportunity, they did not have a balanced budget, and, Madam Speaker, it was necessary to repeal the legislation that said you should have it. So I think for anybody who's paying attention, it's pretty clear that having this legislation, is not going to be meaningful, because any government will have the chance to do exactly what the NDP did when it didn't suit them, and that is to repeal the legislation. So it's really not really worth much at all in terms of guiding the future of our province, guiding the spending or the management of our province. There are a lot of things that have to be taken into account for governments. I know that the accounting and the financing is not an easy matter. It's not simplistic. And a bill like this makes it rather simplistic. I think that the main part is that this legislation that we're discussing really does not have any place in our government, because it, not only here but in other provinces, it's been shown to be very easy to overturn such legislation. And it's interesting that the government tried this year themselves in the budget and the FMA Act to put exactly those kind of simplistic things into place to try and legislate certain taxes that they have set rates on or reduced or eliminated taxes on, and tried to set that into legislation as if that rigid approach is going to be any different than what the minister said here about having a rigid approach to a balanced budget. If it's good in one place, it should be good in both, but it's the government's political attempt to basically create a scenario where they can mislead Nova Scotians about what the other party's intent is. Because if we vote against the FMA, there might be the idea that we would be voting against the tax benefits that have been given to Nova Scotians. And nothing could be further from the truth, Madam Speaker. But these are political ploys and political games that are played here that are done to try and jam the other party into the corner. There's a lot of sport analogies used, Madam Speaker, as you know, here in the House, about getting your elbows up or getting people in the corner and things like that, which have to do with, I guess, hockey or other sports. And, I don't always relate well to those analogies, but I get the idea. I know what they're saying when they say they're trying to jam us one way or the other. Mr. Speaker, as I said, in the dying days of the PC government, they tried to do some creative accounting, which would allow them to show that to pretend that there was a surplus. And I'm thinking of the 2009 budget that didn't pass because we went to an election. But in that creative accounting, there was the prepayment to universities. That was one of our more recent memory, the first time there was a big loading up of this year's costs on last year to show a balanced budget. That is exactly what the Conservative government did. The NDP opposition at the time howled about what a misuse of power that was. They howled and complained that you can't do that. You can't prepay the universities all this money and pretend that you have a balanced budget, which did keep the Conservatives within their legislation. But it was very much creative accounting. It was very much taking liberties with the truth, really, in terms of how the financial figures were being presented. But that became a bit of a moot point because we had an election, a new government was elected, and lo and behold, Madam Speaker, did they not do the same thing? After hiring Deloitte to come in and tell them what the problem was and to create, under false assumptions, create an idea that we were going to face an enormous deficit if we didn't have the NDP riding on a white stallion to rescue us from this made-up $1.4 billion deficit that they saw coming, then they created their own fiction, and part of that relied on the very same tool, the same accounting mechanism that the Conservatives had done in 2009, which was prepaying universities. Well, the NDP had learned well, and they did exactly the same thing, only now they weren't howling about it, they were boasting about it. So even though the Deloitte study said, don't do that anymore. Don't prepay universities and build up your deficit from the year before to show a budget that's balanced. I think there's an important thing here, Madam Speaker, that people need to remember. You can bring forth a balanced budget, but the real truth and the real proof of it is if you can come in at the end of the year in a surplus position. That is not happening. Madam Speaker, the government now, the NDP government of our day, has promised in the election 4 years ago that they would have balanced budgets every year. That has not happened every year. But it was important to the scenario that in an election year, they show a balanced budget. And Madam Speaker, we all know that the minister herself mused very loudly about the possibility that this wasn't going to be possible. It might not happen. Right up to just short weeks before the budget came down, clearly there was a lot of uncertainty about whether this could be done. And then somehow, just as the cartoonist showed in the paper, the Premier pulled a rabbit out of a hat somehow. This great big financial rabbit got pulled out of the hat, and we see a balanced budget, so-called. Madam Speaker, based again on the incorrect handling of finances, which is to prepay universities or prepay anybody in a period of time when the funds don't correlate to. They don't belong in that previous year. They belong for this year in the costs that are this year. So, Madam Speaker, we've been over that on every discussion, and time again, I have shown that this budget is not balanced, and the leader of the third party has shown the same thing. We've been on the same page on this one. It is not. We have shown it, Madam Speaker. I guess some of the members want to hear again how this happens. How is it that it's not balanced? It's not balanced because $34 million was prepaid to Acadia and NASCAD. And that $34 million should have shown up in this year because it relates to running and operating those universities this year. But we gave it to them on the last business day of 2012-13, March 28th. Because of that, last year's deficit for the province went up by $34 million, but really the government didn't care too much because it was already $277 or $290 million in deficit. So we just push a bit more into that year. But the most important thing was the narrative for this year, what would show as a balanced budget this year so that there would be a good story to start the election. But, Madam Speaker, that is not the way you balance a budget in reality. That's the way you manipulate figures to look balanced. And we don't accept it. We say it is not a balanced budget. That's only one thing that was done, Madam Speaker. There were other things done. And I would love to go I would love to go to, and only 2 universities. Why only 2? Maybe it was okay to show a razor-thin surplus. You could have prepaid all of them because you broke the rule anyway. Madam Speaker, the NDP, the Finance Ministry, the people who constructed this budget all broke the rule that Deloitte set. Deloitte, who are often touted as being these great saviors of the government, having set out the course, they specifically said don't prepay universities. But if you're going to break the rule, why not go whole hog? You could have shown a $300 million surplus, which would have been just as fictitious by paying everything last year. Let's just pay everybody last year, show a $1 billion deficit last year. Madam Speaker, is my time elapsed? 10 seconds left. Madam Speaker, my point is this year's budget is not balanced. Thank you.
Now recognize the Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I do want to say that I appreciate the remarks, or at least most of them, of the member that just spoke.
Too bad. It was good.
But I do want to just say to the Minister of Finance, who spoke a few moments ago, who brought up my time when I worked as Chief of Staff with Premier John Ham and questioned the financial record of that year. I just so happened to have with me, Madam Speaker, quite by luck I have this with me, the budget highlights for the fiscal year 2004-2005, the last year that I did work with Premier Ham before I went and ran the credit unions for 6 years. And I just want to share with the Minister of Finance the record in that budget that she finds offensive. And I quote from the budget highlights document of the government, not a partisan document, the government itself, that it's the 3rd consecutive balanced budget, that the actual surplus for the previous year, 2003-2004, was reported as $14,500,000, that the surplus contained in that budget is $2,100,000, and I know the actual result came in much higher than that. And in addition, the budget contained the province's first deposit in its debt retirement fund, something we used to have that seems to have gone strangely missing in the last few years, Madam Speaker. Here's another fun one.
No, debt retirement fund.
In this last budget that I worked on with Premier Ham, the one the Minister of Finance disagrees with so much, GDP is forecast to grow by 3.4%. That's 68 times. That's 68 times the 0.2 that the current government is turning in, Madam Speaker. Federal sources of revenue grew by a grand total of $6 million, under the Liberals, of course, but my point is that the government at that time was not getting a windfall from Ottawa like this one is, and provincial sources grew by $267 million, 8%, because the economy was strong. So here's the first lesson, Madam Speaker. One of the most important ways to balance the budget is to run a strong economy, like we did then, unlike the 0.2 that we see today. Now, Madam Speaker, I do also want to point out that in the budget, the last one I worked on, the small business tax threshold was implemented a year earlier than scheduled and set at $300,000, which is the exact opposite of the current government's approach, which is to cut back on the small business threshold, make it harder for small businesses to get ahead. Seniors living in nursing homes will no longer pay for their medical costs. I know the NDP like to take credit for it, but they seem to have forgotten that it was actually a progressive Conservative Premier, Premier Ham, who relieved seniors of that cost in the very budget she's now criticizing. And it contains funding for long-term care beds, something we're still waiting to see from the NDP, Madam Speaker, who get more money than any government in their history and still can't manage to balance the budget or buy a single new long-term care bed. So I'll table that for the benefit of all members who criticize the past when they've managed to make things much worse. I do also want to say, Madam Speaker, that I hear the Minister of Finance continue to claim that she somehow inherited a structural deficit, whatever that is. Can't audit one. The Auditor General can't find one. In fact, the Auditor General went looking to see if what she was saying was accurate, and he said in his most recent report, and I quote directly from the Auditor General, the following exhibit shows the fluctuation in Nova Scotia's results over the past 5 years and does not contain the existence of a structural deficit. So there's a myth that we can finally put to bed, Madam Speaker. Whatever deficits we have today are 100% entirely NDP deficits, Madam Speaker. They inherited a stronger economy, they inherited a surplus, they inherited a debt that was heading down, and they made them all go the wrong way. That's the problem, Madam Speaker. But I don't want to let the Liberals totally off the hook, Madam Speaker. The Liberals like to talk about creative accounting, but of course the mother of all creative accounting ever in the history of Nova Scotia was the Liberal attempt to hide $600 million off the books of the province, add it to the debt and the backs of our kids, and not count it. Now, that's got to win an Academy Award for creativity as the most creative of a creative accounting. There should be an Oscar for that. Of course, we're still paying for that even today, Madam Speaker, and we'll pay for that for years and years to come, and our kids will pay for it, and that's why it's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's time, Madam Speaker, that these ways were put behind us, because who loses when we have a government, whether it's Liberal or NDP, who do these things? Who loses? They will eventually, Madam Speaker, because they're only fooling themselves. They're only fooling themselves when they claim a surplus when it's actually a deficit. The Liberals only fool themselves when they don't count $600 million of spending and try and tell us that their budget is balanced. I've provided the record. Premier Ham in his time was very clear and audited. Madam Speaker, that's the right way to do it. That's why Nova Scotians have as much respect as they do for Premier Ham, particularly the way he managed our economy and the finances of the province. That is what we need to do, because I return to my question. Who loses when a government, whether it's NDP or Liberal, goes so horribly wrong? It's the young Nova Scotians that lose, because they are the ones that are left to pay the bills. When they rack up our debt, when they pass those bills on to someone else to pay, $1.7 billion under the NDP, $600 million in hiding under the Liberals. It's our kids that have to mop up the mess and pay those bills. And that is why, Madam Speaker, the Auditor General has said that it is an ethical question whether it's right for governments to run deficits in this magnitude. And I know I heard the Minister of Finance say, well, in the Depression, someone figured out that you should spend to make things better. And you know what, Madam Speaker? We all get that. That's Economics 101. The problem for the NDP is, the other side of that theory is that you have to make up for those deficits with surpluses someday. But they've never done that. They run deficit after deficit after deficit. They only take up the deficit side. And Madam Speaker, maybe the reason is because we have a weak economy, and they like it that way because then they can trot out that old excuse that they can continue to borrow to infinity because the economy is weak. But Madam Speaker, they have it exactly wrong. The best way to balance the budget, pay for the services that we need, and stop passing on the bills to somebody else to pay is by growing the economy and creating jobs and opportunity here in Nova Scotia. And the best way to do that, Madam Speaker, is not by $200 million job schemes that lose jobs, not by shoveling bucketfuls of money off to companies that come and go and come and go. The best way to do that is by lowering taxes for everybody so families can start to get ahead again, like the HST, which this bill also talks about, a real plan to lower the HST equally for everybody, by paying for it by stopping wasteful government spending, like the 10 health authorities and all those CEOs and VPs that the NDP defend, that the Liberals finally, yesterday, got on. We raised that a year ago last fall as the right way to go, and the Tim Hortons that they subsidize and so on. That is the best way to create jobs and grow the economy. Lower the HST, pay for it by stopping wasteful government spending, create more jobs. Only one party is talking about that. They're the party of debt. They're the party that hides it. We're the party that stops it in its tracks and creates real jobs for young Nova Scotians. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Now recognize the House Leader for the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I want to thank everybody for a great debate. That concludes the business for today. So I'll let the Government House Leader to to tell us what else is going to be going on tomorrow.
Now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wonder with the consent of the House, can we revert back to tabling reports of committees?
Is it agreed?
Agreed. Okay.
Agreed. Tabling reports of committees. Recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As Chairman of the Committee on Law Amendments, I am directed to report to the committee has met and considered the following bill. Bill number 51, an act respecting certain financial measures, and the committee recommends this bill to the favorable consideration of the House without amendment.
Thank you. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Why, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's my pleasure to call business for tomorrow. We will meet from the hours of noon to 6 p.m. And after the daily routine and question period, we will be doing bills for third reading. Bill number 3, 32, 36, 37, 42, 54, and 57. Bills for second reading, bills 67, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, bingo, and committee of the whole, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, on the whole House on bills. With that, Madam Speaker, I ask the House to now rise to meet from the hours of noon to 6 p.m.
The motion is that we do now rise to meet again between the hours tomorrow between the hours of noon and 6 p.m. All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. We have reached the moment of interruption. We now proceed with adjournment debate under Rule 5.5, submitted by the Honourable Member for Lunenburg West, which reads, therefore, be it resolved that unlike the previous Liberal and Conservative governments, the NDP government's plan for health care is putting patients first while reducing administration costs. Now recognize the Honourable Member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I really do appreciate that. I heard on the news just a while ago that today is the International Day of Love, so I'm expecting a wave, a veritable tidal wave of love to come from that side to where I can already feel a little bit of it coming that way.
What's not to love?
What is not to love? Anyway, to debate the resolution that, unlike previous Liberal and Conservative governments, the NDP healthcare plan is putting patients first while reducing administrative spending. And I'm very pleased to speak on this because, in all seriousness, it is a very, very complex and important issue for our province. And I'm sure many are aware that healthcare continues to be the largest portion of the provincial budget. I think we all know that. In fact, the healthcare budget accounts for about 41% of our total provincial spending this year, and I think that equates to roughly $3.9 billion with a B dollars. Madam Speaker, under previous governments, healthcare budgets had been allowed to grow at an unsustainable pace, and that's been talked about in here quite a little bit. In fact, for a long time, this province saw the healthcare budget increase roughly 6 or 7% per year.